internet friends, Grace here. From Romulus to ruin in 1,229 years, the great Roman Empire rose on strength and fell to excess. It was a republic that ruled the world, but somehow failed to rule itself, overextending in every way, ultimately leading to its demise. Today, America's empire teeters, echoing the same cracks 1,500 years later. History's got a playbook and Rome wrote it. In this video, I'll share with you 7 shocking ways the US in 2025 mirrors Rome's fall. We're counting down from 7 to 1. In the last one, it's a wake-up call for 2025. Here we go. Number 7. By 400 AD, Rome broke after stretching its legions from Britain to Persia. According to the DoD, the United States has 750 military bases across 80 countries as of 2025. And its defense budget in 2024 was a record $900 billion. 10% more than in 2023. Do you think they'll ever dial back the spending? Of course not. Every year, that number grows at the expense of the taxpayer. Israel's aggressive expansion policy, partnered with tensions in China, Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East, are draining our country dry, while our towns and their infrastructure crumble. Number 6. The name of the game is distraction. In Caligula's Rome, which involved unrestrained hedonism alongside mental and moral decay, the palaces were turned into brothels and were rife with socially accepted pederasty, where older men mentored and often exploited younger boys, serving as a scandalous distraction alongside gladiatorial games, and free grain being doled out to pacify a restless populace amid erratic rule. It's what we call bread and circuses. Well, just fast forward to 2025, the debauchery isn't limited to a palace. Maybe not Caligula's overt degeneracy on display, but a sanitized, gamified version. Endless dopamine hits to keep you hooked, subtly monetizing youth through child influencers and targeted ads. Alongside economic woes like nearly Weimar levels of hyperinflation during the COVID era and unaffordable housing. Both eras used sexuality and exploitation. Rome was overt and visceral, ours sanitized and algorithmic, meant to sedate the masses, swapping Colosseum crowds for likes and engagement, always ensuring that apathy trumps revolt. No one is even surprised anymore when some senator has a scandal with some teenager. When the president's son has however many disturbing pictures of his sexcapades and illicit substance abuse, it's just another day in America, and that's before we ever touch on the free pornography available on every single computer. It's free because you're not the customer, you're the product, and it's your soul, your attention, your distraction being sold. Maybe bread and circuses were once used to distract, but today's digital overload numbs, burying economic collapse under endless scrolls, leaving a passive populace just staring at a screen. Number 5, borders can't hold. Rome's edges frayed as the Goths poured in by 410 AD. U.S. Customs reported 3 million border encounters in 2024 alone, up 20% from 2023. We know those numbers are skewed. It's much more. Under Biden's presidency, border enforcement was put on the back burner. Millions upon millions of illegals flooded in, not just from South America, but from China and the Middle East. A lot of them came in through the Mexico border. Of course, one of Trump's campaign promises was a strong border, which is key because the more illegals flood into this country, the more crime rates go up and the more normal life is disturbed. Social welfare programs are strained and housing becomes a scarcity. Since the start of 2025, Donald Trump's rate of 37,660 deportations per month, that's what he's averaging, would amount to 1.8 million over 4 years. A considerable quantity, quite a feat, but it's kind of shocking compared to Obama's deportations. Obama racked up 5.3 million deportations from 2009 to 2017. And he kind of did so quietly, didn't he? Either way, the border must be secured and we must take our country back. It's a non-negotiable. Rome's gates fell. Meanwhile, ours are wide open. Number 4, money based on nothing. The Romans' debasement of their silver coins began with Nero in 64 AD and continued until the end of the 3rd century, when there was virtually no silver remaining in their coins. Clipping or shaving the silver off the coins actually got to be a huge problem by 270 AD as inflation soared up to 1,000%. This practice transcended time and empires, as in 1278 AD, all Jewish people in England were arrested on suspicion of coin clipping. That's actually why they put ridges on quarters today, to show that the quarters were unshaven, unclipped. This makes for an interesting parallel, seeing that the dollar has been taken off the gold standard in 1971 with the Bretton Woods Agreement. And during COVID, they printed money at a never-before-seen rate, which made the value of the dollar drop. In 2025, projections have the Fed printing 1 trillion more notes. Much like Rome, the value of the currency shrank for the common folk, while inflation skyrocketed. But one thing that didn't shrink was the top-down control. Number 3, the rot from within. By 450 AD, Rome had become a shell as its senators hoarded while its citizens starved. According to Open Secrets, lobbying amounted to $4.5 billion in 2024, up 12% from 2023. And CEOs received bonuses of $200 million while wages stagnated. There are so many examples of corruption within our government, but a prime example of, senators living it up while citizens starve, or just politicians in general, is Nancy Pelosi, with her congressional salary being $174,000 annually, but her stock portfolio, managed by her husband, has seen gains like $4 million from NVIDIA in 2024, over 20 times her yearly pay, while her net worth tops $240 million with returns exceeding 700% since 2014. Other examples that come to mind are Epstein and P. Diddy, of course, the fall guys, on whom everything was blamed. But the story is that both of these guys leveraged their wealth and connections to manipulate and exploit powerful people, with Epstein's trafficking network ensnaring politicians and financiers, and P. Diddy's alleged freak-offs implicating music industry giants and up-and-coming artists. The giant elephant in the room was, for whom were they doing their bidding? Gee, what country has their tentacles all over our politicians, our culture creation? I don't think it's Norway or Switzerland or Brazil. At any rate, these cases reveal a modern aristocracy hoarding power and privilege, shielded by a web of influence that stretches from Wall Street to Washington, D.C. Number 2, by 476 AD, the crumbling roads and aqueducts of Rome were synonymous with Rome's conclusion. The American Society of Civil Engineers has assigned a D+ rating to U.S. infrastructure in 2025 due to failing bridges and flickering grids. This was highlighted by the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse after a container ship collided with it. Furthermore, the Department of Energy estimates that 20 million people plus lost power in 2024. The problem is that 70% of transmission lines are over 25 years old, and transformers average about 40 years old. So everything is nearing the end of its lifespan and not being readily replaced. The same thing can be said for levees and county water systems that average 50 years old, posing major flood risk. But critical infrastructure isn't prioritized when funding wars comes first. And number 1, 2025's debt signals the end. Well, maybe not the end like the end of humanity, but the end of something. In Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall, military excess and tax fraud destroyed Rome's finances by 476 AD. The U.S. national debt is nearing $37 trillion. There's even this whole apocalyptic debt clock counting down the time. The elephant in the room is, who does the government owe this money to? It's never talked about. It's just talked about that we owe this much. By the way, it doesn't seem like me or you, the American taxpayer, is the problem. I don't personally care if it ever gets paid. I'm not all boomered out like Dave Ramsey over there. I will never tell you to pay it. I'm saying delete some of those zeros. Have the cat walk across the keyboard. Anyway, this is very tedious, but from what I can tell, about 2/3 of this debt is held domestically. The Peter G. Peterson Foundation said that $27 trillion of this debt was public debt held by domestic and foreign investors, with the rest being intragovernmental debt. So when the U.S. government spends more than it collects in taxes, the U.S. Treasury sells these bonds. They're basically IOUs promising repayment with interest. Usually these bonds go to outsiders like banks or foreign countries, but some are snapped up by U.S. government programs like Social Security or Medicare. These programs collect the taxes, and when they have extra cash, they must buy special Treasury bonds by law. So that's how the U.S. ends up in debt to itself, you understand? That's what I was trying to explain. So the Treasury borrows from these funds, creating a debt it owes to itself, kind of like borrowing from your own savings account. They're playing a totally different ball game than us wages. All of it is made up and fake and created out of thin air. You understand the whole principle here. Isn't that just so fun? The Federal Reserve holds about 15% or approximately $5.5 trillion of U.S. debt because the Fed buys Treasury bonds as part of its mission to manage the economy. The Pew Research Center reported that as of January 2023, the Federal Reserve was the largest single holder of U.S. debt. There's some conflicting info being bandied about, but you know how I feel about the Fed. One more time, say it with me. The Fed is a non-government foreign entity with no allegiance to our country. It doesn't get audited ever and should be ended immediately. Individual Americans hold about 17% or $6 trillion of this debt in Treasury bonds. And Social Security and Medicare trust funds account for about $7 trillion according to U.S. Treasury fiscal data. I told you this would be tedious. Foreign holders own an estimated $8 to $9 trillion. The U.S. Treasury data cited by Investopedia did this whole breakdown, listing Japan as holding about $1.1 trillion and China has about $800 billion. The UK holds about $700 billion. My biggest question is what happens if it doesn't get paid? What then, honey? What then? But apparently they say a failure to pay this $37 trillion in debt would shatter trust in U.S. credit, spiking borrowing costs, which would in turn crash the dollar and risk hyperinflation if the Fed prints more to compensate. The whole secret is that it isn't a secret at all. In fact, they've disclosed it numerous times and even had a whole marketing scheme around what they plan to do. They're planning a reset, a great reset, in fact. Default digital dollar control while we're left holding the bag. Seven parallels, overstretched by forever wars, digital circuses, broken borders, fake money, corrupt elites, crumbling bones, and a debt bomb. The U.S. isn't just an empire, it's Rome 2.0. And fun fact, the average lifespan of an empire is generally estimated to be around 250 years. This year, the USA will be 249 years old. And just like Rome, I can diagnose the leading problem in the United States being the corruption from within. Corruption, decadence, the lack of moral fortitude, and inability to speak truth. The controlling houses are only concerned with personal gain, and it's up to us to hold them accountable, to go to town meetings to make sure our towns and our cities don't crumble under the weight of their corruption. We can still secure the American dream for our children, but justice has to be served, and these people have to be held accountable. What do you think, internet friends? You know, I always look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for watching, for subscribing, for supporting my channel on Patreon, for buying my book, The Deep State Encyclopedia. Bye.